tax churches, much less tax them in a different way than based upon appraised value. So this new law decides to tax churches by saying it's not a property tax. Instead, we're going to tax based on the number of square footage in the building. Well, it's still a property tax.
The city of San Rafael sought to have the church's case thrown out, but the court sided with the church. This means the church can now proceed to have its case heard on the merits.
If we do not prevail, if the city gets away with this, then we will see blue cities and blue states across the country seizing on this opportunity to take money from churches, and I'm sure some of them would love to see churches shut down and the property used for something else.
I'm Chris Woodward.
Facebook says it's banning foreign advertisements related to Ireland's abortion referendum amid concerns that North American groups are trying to influence the campaign. Irish voters will decide May 25th whether to repeal a constitutional ban on abortion in a referendum that has drawn international attention. More Americans say their next cars will be electric.
AAA is out with a survey that suggests 20% of Americans, up 5% from last year, say that their next vehicles will be electric. It's good news for EV automakers, though AAA's Greg Brannon says the big concern about EVs is still range.
Running out of charge while you're on the road is an important consideration, as well as the infrastructure out on the road to charge.
Data shows that actual sales of electric vehicles are only 0.05% of new car sales overall. In Chicago, Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
Find more news and information online at onenewsnow.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, and the One News Now mobile app. For American Family News, I'm Steve Jordahl.
Victory McIntosh.
Early will I seek thee, O Lord. Man, it's something about when you start your morning off right with Abba, Father. I'm telling you, will the enemy come? Of course, he's going to do his job. But it should motivate you even more. Man, I got to stay connected to the vine of Jesus. How do you do that? By getting into the Word of God. You got to do it.
Tune in to Word on the Street with Victory McIntosh. Saturdays at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Central on Urban Family Talk. Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
So, if you cross the border unlawfully, even a first offense, then we're going to prosecute you. Those cases are up about double last year, and we're going to go higher this year. It's an offense to enter the country unlawfully. If you smuggle an illegal alien across the border, then we'll prosecute you for smuggling. If you're smuggling a child, then we're going to prosecute you. And that child will be separated from you probably as required by law. If you don't want your child to be separated, then don't bring him across the border illegally. It's not our fault that somebody does that. If you make false statements to an immigration officer or commit fraud in your system, in our system to obtain an immigration benefit, that's a felony too. And we'll put you in jail if you qualify. If you help others to violate the law, that's a felony too. In order to carry out these important new enforcement priorities, I have sent 35 prosecutors and 18 judges to the border. And we're going to move others. Our U.S. attorneys are committed to this. And they're going to reassign people within their offices because it's a national matter. It's an important matter nationally. It's not just one case. It's whether or not we have a border of integrity or lawlessness. And we want integrity in our border. The judges represent a 50% increase in the number of immigration judges at the border. So we're sending a message to the world, really. The border is not open.
Nope, it's not open. It is not a legal entry point for access to the United States. And that was Attorney General Jeff Sessions laying down the law, which was news when I put this show sheet together a few hours ago. But the biggest story breaking right now and cracking all kinds of liberal minds wide open is the fact that President Trump has withdrawn the United States or I should say, ended our participation in the unacceptable Iran deal. So we'll be going over that. My producer was awesome. He pulled a couple of bits of audio for us so we can be right on top of this story. I actually, this morning, I want to give you guys a bunch of updates. Stacey Washington, host of Stacey on the Right, here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk and other networks. So don't feel limited. When you hear me talking about the flagship, the syndicators of record for the show, don't feel like you can't join in on that. If you hear this program and you're a program director and you want to pick it up, it's as easy as emailing me or my producer. So I'll give you some information on that. You can click on over to the affiliate page on Stacey on the Right. You can access that information there as well. So call lines are open, 866-963-2037. You can call in and tell me what you think about the president ending our participation in the Iran deal. Other news on the show today is obviously we've got Elizabeth Warren. Now they've almost ripped the Band-Aid completely off. We're almost to the place where they're going to start openly talking about, and she will admit that she's running for president in 2020. And it is going to be an all-out brawl, no gloves between her and President Trump if she decides to enter the ring. And so she's got a few problems coming up that won't go away about her claim of being Native American or having Native American ancestry. And then, of course, we have Hadley Heath Manning. She's the director of policy for Independent Women's Forum. She's going to join the show. We also have Curtis Houck. He is from Newsbusters. He's going to join the program. So we have a bunch of different things we're going to cover. It's a really fast-moving news day. I want to get into some audio that we have for the announcement that we just heard. So this is breaking news. I felt like it was coming. I felt like it was to be expected, but President Trump is a wild card, so I wasn't sure exactly what he was going to do. And now he's gone ahead and let us know we are not going to participate in the Iran deal any longer, the JCPOA. So I want to listen to the president talking about how we're not going to allow the Iran deal and how the United States keeps our promises.
It is clear to me that we cannot prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement. The Iran deal is defective at its core. If we do nothing, we know exactly what will happen. And we will not allow a regime that chants death to America to gain access to the most deadly weapons on earth. Today's action sends a critical message. The United States no longer makes empty threats. When I make promises, I keep them.
So the president has talked a lot about the positioning of the country and how we were viewed by our allies and our enemies during the Obama administration, and how the kind of prostrated positioning of President Obama enabled our enemies to, if for nothing, lack of a better descriptor, they were able to pull one over on us via our allies. They would say, well, the allies are signing on for this. Well, the allies want this. The allies want, and other nations would say, yeah, this is the best deal we can get. This is all we can get. If we all sign on to this, we'll at least delay the procurement of a nuclear arsenal by Iran. Instead of saying we're going to put a stop to it, we'll just delay it until 2022. So kick the proverbial nuclear can down the road. That's not something that President Trump is willing to put up with. And I'm feeling kind of interesting today because this morning I spoke at, there's a extended learning or lifelong learning institute at Washington University, St. Louis. So the nickname of WashU is the Ivy League of the Midwest, and it is a very expensive, very, very well-respected college. And I was speaking to one of their extension programs, and I was expecting it to be kind of a small group, and I was pleasantly surprised to see almost 50 people seated in the room where I came in to talk. And of course, you know me, everything that I'm doing right now outside of the radio show and, you know, some different writing is obviously about the blueprint from Project 21. And so it was a fascinating morning. These were very, very intelligent, engaged individuals, politically astute. Majority of them were on the left side of the political aisle, but there were some conservatives present as well. And a few people there who remembered me from my short stint as a columnist at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And so it was a great time to be having a speech and doing things like that. But it was also there's this breaking news going on. While I'm there doing that, there was a briefing for White House press, and I didn't get to attend that by phone. And then here we are, time for the show. And, the president has made this announcement. So the first reaction that we have on the record is from, of course, the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu. And he's come out immediately with thanks for the president. We have a little bit of audio on that.
That President Trump did an historic move. And this is why Israel thanks President Trump for his courageous leadership, his commitment to confront the terrorist regime in Tehran, and his commitment to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. Not today, not in a decade, not ever.
So then, in addition to that, the RNC has issued a statement. Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel says that the Iran agreement was built on the lies of a leading state sponsor of terrorism, preserving its nuclear capability and allowing the regime to build a nuclear weapon in several years. President Trump's decision fulfills a promise he made to the American people and corrects an Obama-era mistake that never should have been made. President Trump has made it clear that he will only enter into enforceable agreements that strengthen the security of the United States of America. The other thing I want to point out is that the only reason it is possible for President Trump to end our participation in this deal is because this was done via executive fiat. Instead of President Obama going to Congress and getting people from both sides of the aisle together and coming up with an Iran deal proposal that would stand scrutiny, that would pass muster, to use some military terminology, instead of him doing that, which would have meant that it couldn't have been reversed by a simple announcement by a succeeding president, he didn't do that. And so yet again, we're seeing something that he touted as a part of his legacy being dismantled with so much as a press conference because he didn't do it the right way. We have consent of the governed in this country. We have representative government, which means that if you want something to be permanent, you have to have it go through Congress and then have it signed into law by the sitting president. Anything that you just do executive orders on, like DACA, oh, believe me, it's going away. Judges can put a halt to it at the lower level, but when it comes time to really adjudicate whether or not DACA is something that can be standing American policy, because it didn't go through Congress and it was an executive order, it can be undone. And that's the danger of ruling with the pen and the phone. Barack Obama couldn't find his way into a smoky room or one of those, men's clubs where some of these congressmen and senators like to meet. He couldn't find his way there. He couldn't find his way to invite them to the White House and feed them a nice meal and have some music playing in the background and then get together and say, guess what? We're also not leaving here. The ushers aren't going to let you guys out until we figure out what we can do about X. He couldn't figure out a way to do that. And so, hence the dismantling of yet another one of his signature legacy items. And make no mistake about it, the JCPOA was a total mistake. Now, I have a couple of statements here. I have one from the Office of the Press Secretary, remarks by President Trump on the JCPOA, and that stands for Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This is via the Diplomatic Reception Room, and it was issued 2:13 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to give you a couple of points from the president. In theory, the so-called Iran deal was supposed to protect the United States and our allies from the lunacy of an Iranian nuclear bomb, a weapon that would only endanger the survival of the Iranian regime. In fact, the deal allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium and over time reach the brink of a nuclear breakout. Now, I want to just pause here before I read this last paragraph because it's a full-page letter, but there's 3 paragraphs that matter. And I want to call your attention to a caller we had, I believe it was yesterday, and he said he was watching the show for the first time via Periscope, and he was trying to figure out what about Bibi Netanyahu's announcement had caused me to believe that the Iran deal was no good, which I'm sorry if I made it seem like it was Netanyahu's announcement that turned me against it. For that particular listener, I actually have said many times on the program that I oppose this deal, that it was a weak sauce, cobbled together garbage can of useless pronouncements that didn't bind Iran to abide by what we want, which is that they cannot have nuclear weapons. And so accordingly, seeing the president dismantle it is yet another thing I can add to the list of things. I have 2 lists, things he's done I haven't liked, things he's done that I have liked. And that's over on the like side because I think we can get a better deal. Now, it's been expressed on this program by experts that we've had on the show, Nicholas Grossman, others, who've said that it will be very difficult to get the other countries back to the table to create a new deal. But since Israel has now shown that they're not abiding by the current deal, and the deadline was today, and the president has announced that there's no longer United States participation, then it looks like we're going to have to come up with another deal. And other nations are going to have to come around the table and do that. Now, will they be cooperative? Will they be angry about it? I don't know. But that's a part of the negotiation that I expect the president and his cabinet members will take on fully prepared. So he goes on to say, in other words, at the point when the United States had maximum leverage, this disastrous deal gave this regime, and it is a regime of great terror, many billions of dollars, some of it in actual cash, a great embarrassment to me as a citizen and to all citizens of the United States. Now, this is the crux of where liberals fail to understand how Donald Trump can speak to the American people. As flawed as he is, as many mistakes as he makes, as often as he says things where I'm like, dude, you don't have to go there. You don't have to say that. Just, as often as I scroll through and I see a tweet, I'm like, oh man, not again. As often as there's that, there's this here. And so just like you love someone in your family who is perennially maybe late or perennially has something going on that you find annoying, but you still love that person because they're there in a pinch and they've helped you out before, we're getting to that place with Donald Trump, where really you have to decide, is it the tweets that matter or is it the fact that he promised to get us out of this deal and now he's gotten us out of this deal? Now, I will not stop holding the president's feet to the fire or holding him accountable for things that he does that I find unacceptable, like that omnibus bill. We haven't even gone in on that yet, but I'm waiting to see what the rescission is going to be about. And we're going to talk about that as well today on the show. I'm going to play some audio that explains what the Rescission Act is, and then we're going to go, into that so we can understand what Congress can do to fix the omnibus bill. But I got to give you this to you again. As an American, I felt exactly as he has described here. President Trump says that this deal was a disaster. It gave a regime of terror billions of dollars, some of it in actual cash, which was an embarrassment to him as a citizen and to all citizens of the United States. Once again, he speaks my language, so I'm willing to keep going. No way do we want someone else in here. They're not going to deliver like this. No way. So we'll be back with more after these messages. Stay there.
% of the time, an abortion-minded mother who views an ultrasound or sonogram of her baby will choose life. Here's the story of Candace.
The sonogram sealed the deal for me. My baby was like this tiny little spectrum of hope. And I saw his heart beating on the screen. And knowing that there's life growing inside, that sonogram changed my life. I went from just Candace to Mom. Thank you to everybody that has given these gifts. You guys are giving more than money. You guys are giving love.
There are currently preborn centers which do not have an ultrasound machine. Would you sponsor a machine today? Dial pound 250 and say keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Or go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Your love could save a life.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a Legacy Moment. Lyle Dorset wrote a wonderful book about the life and ministry of Dwight L. Moody, the great evangelist. It's called A Passion for Souls. One of the things that impressed me as I read this book was Moody's commitment to listening to God's direction and then fully following what God was telling him to do. It's no wonder that the impact of this man's work for Christ and his kingdom is being felt and expanded over 100 years after his death. The worldwide impact, for example, of Moody Bible Institute in Chicago and Moody Church right there in Chicago as well are prime examples. You see, God wants what we do to have a lasting impact. Let me say that again, and I want you to think about that statement. God wants what we do to have a lasting impact. He wants to direct our lives and our activities so that he is glorified and we make a difference, not just for time, but for eternity. Listen to these words in Psalm 37, verse 23. The steps of a man are established by the Lord, and he delights in his way. The delight of God is in the man's way simply because his steps have been established. God wants each of us to look to him for direction. We should ask, where does he want me to go? How can my life count? How can what I do matter for eternity? What God initiates, he establishes. Don't miss that point. God delights in us when we pursue his plan. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. It is not what we want that matters. It's God's plan that makes all the difference in the world. Study his word, pray, ask for wisdom. When you walk according to his will, your feet will make a permanent imprint, just like D.L. Moody.
More information about the ministry of Crawford Loritz can be found online at livingalegacy.org.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
Hey, welcome back to the show, everybody. At Stacy on the Right on Twitter and Instagram. StacyOnTheRight.com is the website where you can subscribe and get the weekly newsletter. And please open it when it comes in your mailbox that once a week. You know, we track all that stuff. Everything's tracked now, everything. The one thing I don't do is I don't share your information. I don't sell the list. And there's no tracking or bots or anything like that that can give you any more or give me any more information about you than what you've provided, which is usually just your first and last name. So really grateful to the thousands of people who subscribe to my blog, and I would love to see more people jump on there and do the same. I want to also point out that what was I speaking about today at Washington University's Lifelong Learning Institute? Well, it was the Blueprint, and you can find out more about it at blueprint.project21.org. And we would love to have your feedback on it, have you read it, have you consider it. We're using the carrot approach, no stick. So whatever you love about it, we're going to join in on that. And we want to find places where we can all intersect, join together, and work towards more freedom and more prosperity for our disadvantaged communities in this country. So right now, it's my pleasure to welcome Hadley Heath Manning, Director of Policy for the Independent Women's Forum. Thank you so much for coming on, Hadley.
Of course, Stacey. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It is. And I know you're here to talk about the government's role in the opioid epidemic. And so we'll get to that. I wanted to get a quick statement from you or what your thoughts are on the president withdrawing the United States from participation in the JCPOA.
Well, he gave a terrific speech. He's doing the right thing. Taking the U.S. out of the Iran deal is not just important in terms of the policy specific to Iran, but it's important on the global stage because geopolitically we have certain countries, I'm thinking of North Korea and even to a certain extent Russia and China, who need to understand that the United States is no longer going to be taken advantage of. We're not going to be snookered. We're not going to be participating in deals that are not in the best interest of our national security and our economic security. And so I think that this is a very important and very positive development for our foreign policy.
Yeah, thank you. I think your analysis is dead on. One of the things that has been rapidly evolving over this past few months since the president has kind of settled in spite of the investigations and the obstruction by the Democrats, we're seeing an emerging Trump doctrine that I think is going to be a substantial directional shift from what we saw under President Obama. And I welcome it. I'm glad to see him taking a strong stance. And I think it's going to be good for our country that he's doing that and he's not afraid to do that. So also lost in amongst the announcements yesterday of news was the fact that they collected, I don't even remember how many millions of pills during the, turn in your pill day that they had nationally across the country. And so you have a piece up at Independent Women's Forum on the untold story of government's role in the opioid epidemic. Tell us more about it.
I was concerned that this Take Back Day, this annual event, and it's basically a government-sponsored event that encourages people who have prescription opioids or other prescription drugs who are no longer, in date, no longer prescribed for their use, to give those drugs back and dispose of them safely so that they don't go into a black market. They aren't sold to people who shouldn't be taking them, for example. And I was concerned that this year that event would not be as successful because we know that we have an opioid epidemic in this country. We know that a lot of people become addicted to opioids because they initially had a health need where they had an injury or they had some kind of legitimate prescription for painkillers. And then after becoming addicted, many of them, unfortunately, have turned to other drugs that are not legal, like heroin or forms of fentanyl. And this crisis is taking an enormous toll, not just in terms of the lives lost and the lives and the relationships that are being destroyed, but economically speaking, it's a very costly problem for our country and for our labor market. And so in response to that, the Trump administration is going to be very tough on opioids. They've considered a variety of ways to essentially limit, for example, the length of time that someone can be on an opioid prescription, or to essentially monitor the ways that various health providers are prescribing these legal and sometimes necessary drugs. And so now we're sort of in this catch-22 where you want patients who have a legitimate need, and many people suffer from chronic pain, and they need to be on opioids for a very long time. They may have some kind of dependency, but they are not truly addicted. They're not facing, potential for death or overdose by mixing these drugs with others or overdosing on these drugs. And so what do we do here? What's the correct policy moving forward so that we don't limit access to these drugs for people who have a legitimate need, but at the same time, we avoid, unnecessarily hooking folks into addictions that they might have otherwise been able to avoid. So I think, my suggestion, the bottom line from this column that I wrote called the Untold Story of Government's Role in the Opioid Epidemic, is that we ought to avoid sweeping generalities. We ought to avoid federal government policies that focus on the 30,000-foot view, but rather empower individual healthcare providers, doctors, physician's assistants, nurses, people who are at the clinical level interfacing with patients to make their own decisions, what's in their own clinical best judgment about what patients need, because this was actually not the case before. This was actually not the case when the opioid epidemic was becoming a problem. Instead, the government actually took a very pro-opioid stance or very pro-painkiller stance in some of its policies preceding our ultimately our attempts now to reverse course.
Wow. So first of all, I agree. One of the things that ends up happening now, because our news cycle has ramped up to, a week's worth of news in 24 hours every single day, is that some of the better things, some of the good news items just get swept completely away. But I saw it. I saw it reported all over the place. It was just a blip here or there that all of those pills were collected, and that I even saw people commenting on television that it wasn't being talked about. So that's fantastic. And I think it does take a more nuanced approach. One of the most interesting things about it is that, the traditional method of dealing with anything having to do with addiction is we got to find a way to stop it altogether. Stopping illegal drugs is a war we've been fighting for over 3 decades. But opioids are not illegal drugs. They're actually prescription. They're prescribed, but there's a bit of abuse in the prescribing for some people, and for other people, they just have too many and they stay on it for too long, and they're not warned or cautioned or reminded by home health care that they need to be more careful about, like, taking this past 3 or 4 days could put you at risk of becoming dependent, which then leads to addiction possibly. And people might hear that, but if you're sick and you're just trying to get out of the hospital, you may not listen as closely as you should. And so we need more of a program, a concerted educational effort around people who are sick, who really need a little bit more attention after they leave the hospital, to make sure that they're not taking too many of the pain pills or continuing to take them when they really don't need to take them at all.
That's right. And we're not actually at a point now where opioid prescriptions are at an all-time high. That happened actually several years ago. We've seen a tapering off in terms of prescriptions because in the medical community, the doctors and other prescribers have known for some time that opioid prescriptions could be problematic and could result in addiction. And so they've tried to be more careful and to limit the prescriptions that they're handing out. But what we haven't seen is a downstream effect where the death and dying and the suffering from addiction has decreased because, as I mentioned, a lot of people may start with an addiction to a legal opioid prescription and then move to those illicit drugs. which have a whole host of other risks associated with them, whether it's becoming infected from various diseases that stick on the needles or, becoming sexually abused. That's unfortunately one of the side effects for women who participate in the illegal drug market sometimes. And so addressing this is going to be more than just cracking down on drug makers and on drug prescribers, meaning doctors and others in the healthcare system. But I do think it illustrates that for a long time now, politicians and other bureaucrats have been in the business of setting healthcare policy when they really don't have the expertise to make clinical decisions about what each and every patient needs. And so I think the opioid epidemic is actually a cautionary tale about having a government and having various bureaucracies that are too big to see the forest for the trees. They are, unfortunately, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the Veterans Health Administration, even to some extent the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, have had policies in the past that at the very least allowed the opioid epidemic to become the crisis that it is today, and in some cases actually fostered the crisis by, for example, including questions on Medicare and Medicaid surveys about customer satisfaction, saying, did you get enough painkillers, basically? And then if patients said, no, I didn't, then that ultimately hurt the reimbursement, hurt the payment that various hospitals and doctors would receive from those government insurance programs. And they've gotten away from that now, just effective January 2017. They've taken some of those survey questions off so that they no longer affect reimbursement. But there hasn't been just an accident of history here that we have this opioid epidemic. We ought to look very carefully at some of the ways that our government made mistakes in setting policies related to the treatment and addressing of pain that may have contributed actually to more addiction than otherwise we would have seen.
Wow. So isn't it amazing? And I actually talked about this today in my little speech, how the unintended consequences of some of the actions that government takes can result in painful, sometimes devastating consequences for populations of Americans who are interfacing with the government. So it's not that all government is bad. It's that we really have this unfettered behemoth that, someone says, it would be a good idea if we make sure people are getting enough pain meds. So they put the question on there, and the backlash from that is that doctors are like, wow, we can't get our reimbursements unless we give these people 60 or 90 days worth of these opioids. Well, we're just going to have to do it because they have to pay staff. They have to keep the doors open. So they do it. And then you have Americans, like 55,000 Americans last year, dying of opioid overdoses. That's crazy. That's like a number like that. You would think everybody would just say, stop. Everything stops for a week until we figure out what's went wrong here. But it's not really that. It's just been, a blip here and there in the news.
That's right. And you're dead on point with the law of unintended consequences here. I don't mean to say that Uncle Sam or anybody who works for the government or anybody who works in the Veterans Affairs hospitals was ever acting with malice or ever acting with, some kind of selfishness when they would prescribe opioids. I'm sure they were trying to do what was best for patients and trying to implement policies that they thought were best for patients. For example, the Veterans Health Administration was one of the earliest adopters of this idea that pain should be treated as the fifth vital sign. And ultimately, many medical associations now, just in the last year or so, have rescinded this guidance and have said, we do not believe that pain should be treated as a vital sign. It's not like your temperature. It's not like your blood pressure. It is not something we can measure objectively. It's something you always have to ask the patient, how much pain are you feeling? Maybe they point to a scale with the frowny faces, if anybody knows what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Or they say, oh, my pain's at a level 6 or something. So that's, unfortunately, we can't really measure what kind of pain people are in, and we shouldn't be using pain as a vital sign because in many cases, medically speaking, pain is just a symptom. It is not a disease. It's pointing us in the direction of solving a deeper problem within the human body or within, our physiology. So I would say that when the Veterans Health Administration does anything, it sends a very strong message to the rest of the healthcare system and to other hospitals that this is what is expected from Uncle Sam. This is what they think the best practices are. And so your hospital better follow suit and hospitals depend very, very much on reimbursement from Medicare and Medicaid, and you can only be accredited to serve Medicare and Medicaid patients by an organization called the Joint Commission. And so when the Joint Commission was also encouraging hospitals to treat pain as the fifth vital sign, they were going down that road of encouraging perhaps the overassessment and overtreatment of pain, at least in the pharmaceutical way. So I would say, an examination of our history is always important, because if we don't learn history, we're doomed to repeat it. And if nothing else, this is a cautionary tale against too big of a government hand in healthcare.
I don't know why they take the Veterans Administration as the leader when they allowed 387,000 veterans to die waiting to get access to an appointment just to be seen. The Veterans Administration should be the ones who are last, they bring up the rear. We should use teaching hospitals or hospitals that have perfect ratings on patient care or patient outcomes to be the leaders in what are standards for the healthcare industry in this country. And I have to say, as someone who's been to the hospital and had surgery before, one of the most ridiculous things that I experienced having to do with pain and pain management is that so morphine doesn't work on me. It does not work. No matter how much they can give me enough for 2 grown men, and morphine does not stop pain. And we're talking post-surgical pain here. So that's kind of some of the worst pain you can ever feel intentionally. And so I remember telling the second surgery I had, I remember telling them going in, morphine doesn't work on me. So when I come out of surgery and you're giving me something for the pain, when the anesthesia wears off, if you give me morphine, I'm going to experience the full brunt of the pain of the surgery. So please give me something else. And they said, we'll give you an alternative. Instead, they gave me the morphine. So I woke up and he held up the little piece of paper. It's usually bright yellow and it had the faces on it. And he said, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your pain? And I said, I'm a 10. I'm hurting. This is painful. And he said, well, we've given you, a double dose of morphine. And so I just started screaming. I just started screaming at the top of my lungs. I'm in pain and no one will give me any pain medication. And magically, when you start screaming, someone comes in and gives you something to knock you out because they want to shut you up because, you upset the other patients on the floor. So I have to say, dealing with pain is something that they should be concerned with, but there has to be a smarter way than what they're doing right now. Thank you so much for joining the show today and for writing this important piece. I'll share it online. Thanks, Hadley.
Thank you.
All right. When we get back, we have more for you. We're going to get back on this JCPOA thing because I have some answers to some questions that were asked to me right here on this show, and I want to make sure and be proactive in answering questions. So stay there. Stacey on the right.
This is Uncommon Moments with Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy and his wife Lauren on their uncommon marriage adventure. Available now in paperback.
In James 5:16, James wrote, "The earnest prayer of a righteous person has great power and produces wonderful results." So imagine the power of a couple who pray together. Again, it will take intentionality to make time to be still and to pray with each other. Now, Tony makes sure that we do that in our household. Every night before we go to bed, he reaches over to the nightstand and he sets his alarm clock. So every morning when that alarm goes off and the bedroom light goes on, we get up together and we spend glorious time with our Heavenly Father.
The Uncommon Marriage Adventure by Tony and Lauren Dungy. Now available in softcover from Tyndale Momentum. More info at CoachDungy.com.
Family is an institution set forth by God, one man and one woman for life, with the outflow being children produced by that union. It's obvious to all that there is an attack on the family in our country, and especially on fathers. Whether it's the cycle of sin that persists in our families or the pressure from our government to exclude men from being intimately involved, the strategic battle is on for the souls of men. Join us in the battle to strengthen fatherhood. urbanfamilytalk.com.
Equipped with Chris Brooks.
This program is an apologetic endeavor. We tackle news, current events, cultural trends, and phenomenons from a Christian worldview perspective. Why? Because we're looking for insights into culture that will allow us to more effectively, more contextualize the gospel so that we can reach men and women for Christ.
Get equipped with Chris Brooks.
Join me Monday through Friday at noon Central Time on Urban Family Talk.
I'm not so certain we have as much time as many of us think. It's high time for the body of Christ to return with a fire lit up under us to proclaiming the truth of God's word, to proclaim the truth of sin and repentance, and not coming from a high, lofty position, but telling the truth as such were some of us. We have to do that. We have to. But what happens is, and I call this first world problem, we have this epidemic of churchianity in America, to where we are far more accepted and far more willing to embrace the trappings of church life, even if they're void of the presence and power and fire of Christ. And I would say to you, just as the Bible says, that we can have a form of godliness while simultaneously, at the exact same time, deny the very power of the gospel.
Tune in to the Hamilton Quarter, weekday afternoons at 5 Central on Urban Family Talk. This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Last month, New York's comptroller urged companies to follow that lead. According to a report in Bloomberg, comptroller Tom DiNapoli sent letters to 9 companies and asked them to explore whether gun transactions should be classified with restricted high-risk purchases like porn, illicit drugs, and cryptocurrencies. DiNapoli oversees the New York State Retirement Fund, the third largest public pension fund in the U.S. with roughly $209 billion in assets.
The private sector has a responsibility if government does not step in.
Second Amendment advocates say his letter is extortion.
It seems the left now is going for private companies to try and institute their vision for gun control instead of going through the government. You can't vote out your big banks.
Since Parkland, at least 4 states have made changes to existing gun laws or enacted new ones.
As to whether or not it's going to have a large impact on gun violence, I think that's certainly debatable, and we certainly haven't seen a lot of additional violence in states where they're not enacted.
Wow. So that was Stephen Gutowski of the award-winning Washington Free Beacon, and he was commenting on the fact that the gun lobby is taking the gun control lobby is taking a multi-pronged approach to trying to get rid of what they see as, problematic gun rights. So they're using private corporations and banks to try to infringe on gun rights, and they're also just basically saying, look, anybody who can help us with this, we're throwing in with them. And it's wrong because it's not going to save any lives. It's not going to stop people who have mental illness from doing the thing that they do. So now we're kind of catching up and circling back around on the show. I want to get to this audio about this. It was like a big kind of expose that they did on TV about it's a furor concerning Elizabeth Warren's ancestry, which was brought on by her. She received a job at Harvard University based on being a minority, and she doesn't want to verify whether or not she's a minority by simply having a DNA test done. So here she is. Here is the expose that they did, just a little bit of it. It's number 5.
Even though she doesn't run, Warren goes on the offensive as she and Donald Trump engage in their very public feud.
And Massachusetts is represented by Pocahontas, right? Pocahontas.
Nasty women have really had it with guys like you.
And she makes it clear that she's going to fight for the party by going after Donald Trump.
So help me God.
When the campaign ends, the insults don't.
You were here long before any of us were here. Although we have a representative in Congress who they say was here a long time ago. They call her Pocahontas.
Now we have a president who can't make it through a ceremony honoring Native American war heroes without reducing Native history, Native culture, Native people to be the butt of a joke.
When confronted about calls for her to settle the issue of her heritage by taking a DNA test, Warren dismisses the suggestion.
What's wrong with knowing?
Look, I do know. I know who I am. And never used it for anything, never got any benefit from it anywhere.
You begin to wonder, like, is this going to become similar to Hillary Clinton's emails, an issue that just keeps coming up over and over again? Republicans are certainly going to bring it up.
It's true. It's going to be something very similar to the Clinton emails, although it is not a felony to lie about your ancestry in order to get a job. It goes to the credibility of the person that she would do that. So, you know, we have Elizabeth Warren on the record as saying that she was always told she had high cheekbones and therefore she has Indian ancestry. And the easiest way for her to put all of this down is to simply say, hey, you know what? I am going to have a blood test and I'm not doing it for you or for you or for you. She could just do it for herself. That way she could be, you know, on the up and up, and she could put this to rest. But my thought is that she won't do that. She's not going to do that. Why should she? You know, whatever. So now I want to get back to the letter from the president. I said there were just a few paragraphs, but actually there's a little bit more. And this is super important because this is going to change the dynamic for our foreign policy. And it's really it's already set into motion a change in the course of events. With now other nations have to plan for what they're going to do, as does Iran. So there were some questions yesterday from the first-time caller about what about the Iran deal made it something that conservatives oppose. Well, here's just a few of the statistics about it. So first of all, the president in his statement shared that Iran's military budget has grown by 40% since the deal was reached. The economy is doing very badly. So they took the money from the Iran deal and they put it into their defense. They didn't put it into feeding their people, housing them, start jobs, infrastructure, none of that. They put it into their military. The dictatorship used their new funds to build nuclear-capable missiles, support terrorism, and cause havoc throughout the Middle East and beyond. The agreement was so poorly negotiated that even if Iran fully complied, the regime can still be on the verge of a nuclear breakout in just a short period of time. Now, the sunset provision, that's a huge problem within the deal. The sunset provisions are totally unacceptable. If I allowed this deal to stand, this is what President Trump wrote, there would soon be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Everyone would want their weapons ready by the time Iran had theirs. Do you understand that? So for those who keep saying how, well, Donald Trump he's just crazy. He's irresponsible. He's a liar. Looks to me like he's totally plugged into this issue and he's trying to protect America. A nuclear-capable Middle East is a disaster. These are people who, when they get angry, they blow stuff up. They regularly have terrorism in all of their countries, and now they've imported it into America and all of the Western nations in Europe. And so the same kind of people who will rent a truck and drive it through a crowd of people to make a statement about Allah or to help, wage war on the infidels on behalf of ISIS, what do you think they'd do if they had access to a military that had nuclear capability? Come on. There's a very serious problem here, and the president is trying to address it. Now, he then goes on to address the inspection provisions lacking adequate mechanisms to prevent, detect, and punish cheating. They don't even have an unqualified right to inspect many important locations, including the military facilities. So it's basically their word. Are you guys working towards creating a nuclear arsenal? No. Okay, thank you so much. We'll call back next month. Who wouldn't take advantage of that? The deal failed to halt Iran's nuclear ambitions, but also failed to address the regime's development of ballistic missiles that can deliver nuclear warheads. Finally, the JCPOA did nothing to constrain Iran's destabilizing activities, including Iran's support for terrorism. Since the agreement was signed by President Obama and the other participating nations, Iran's bloody ambitions have grown only more brazen. In light of these glaring flaws, I announced last October that the Iran deal must either be renegotiated or terminated. 3 months later, on January 12th, I repeated these conditions. I made it clear that if the deal could not be fixed, the U.S. would no longer be a party to the agreement. Over the past few months, we have engaged extensively with our allies and partners around the world, including France, Germany, and the UK. We've also consulted with our friends from across the Middle East and are unified in our understanding of the threat and in our conviction that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. After these consultations, it is clear to me that we cannot prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement. So then he went on to say a few more comments. He went on to sign the deal, and that just happened. So that's over. Now, I also have the memo of withdrawal, which is the actual text of that memo, and it's addressed as the National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM-11, and it goes to the Secretary of State, Treasury, Defense, Attorney General, Secretary of Energy, Homeland Security, Assistant to the President and Chief of Staff, U.S. Trade Representatives, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Joint Chiefs, President of the Economic Policy, Counsel to the President, Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. So the whole kit and caboodle. And it talks in this memo about the reasons for it, and I'll just give you the headings. He talks about the policy itself, ending United States participation in the JCPOA, restoring United States sanctions, which are extensive, preparing for regional contingencies, to swiftly and decisively meet all possible modes of Iranian aggression against the United States, our allies, and our partners. And that part of the memo is addressed specifically towards the Department of Defense. Monitoring Iran's nuclear conduct in consultation with allies and partners, and general provisions that basically outline how all of these things are to be done, and it's signed by the president. So that's where we are right now. Now, I know a lot of people are going to have, their thoughts and their feelings on it, but elections have consequences. And this is one of the consequences that those of us who voted for Donald Trump were hoping for. Let's go to the phones. We've got David in California. Hey, David, thanks for calling into the show.
How's it going, Stacey?
Pretty well.
I was overhearing you guys talking about Iran, the Iran deal.
Yes.
And I wanted to hear your thoughts about democracy in Iraq.
Iraq?
Hello, Stacey?
Yes, I'm still here. Democracy in Iraq?
In Iraq? Yeah.
What about it?
Don't you think there's a correlation between democracy in Iraq and the Iran deal?
I don't know. Why don't you share what you think it is?
Oh. Well, I think it's foreign states influencing Americans through proxy. They don't have the funds to, support the war campaign overseas that don't benefit Americans, while we drink yellow Flint water here at home.
You said you're in California?
Yeah. We'd have a giant hole in our dam in our case.
And so are you at all aware of what has caused the infrastructure problems in California that you're currently experiencing?
Oh, I'm fully aware. I think it has to do with democracy in Iraq. They would rather ship trillions of dollars over to Israel, Iran, funding democracy with, a Muslim majority. I think that's where our finances went to.
Okay, so that's not actually the case. What's going on in California is you guys have allowed environmentalists to dictate to your government officials and elected officials how your state should be run. And so where you had an aquifer system and you had levees and dams and lots of different things that were working together in concert to create the breadbasket of the entire nation in California, one of the primary sources of food production for the entire country, you guys then allowed those systems to erode because of poor money management and, I'm sorry, but single rule by Democrats. So there's a lot more to what's going on there in California. And unfortunately, it may be convenient to say that it's because we're trying to peddle democracy in the Middle East. And I'm against that. I think we should stop nation building in the Middle East. I think it's a waste of time us being over there. But nobody else seems to agree. Every president who says we're going to get out always goes right back in, always stays. So we're there permanently. It looks like we're never going to extract. But in California, you guys have the GDP bigger than the top 5 countries that come after the United States. And you have the ability, if you actually used your money and your resources properly and didn't listen to environmentalists, you guys could return to the status that you held before Democrats took over exclusive rule. So I do think there are 2 problems here. Namely, one is waste and mismanagement in the state of California, because you guys have epic taxation. You have a crazy amount of Americans who are dive bombing out of California and moving to Texas and Florida and anywhere else they can move to because of the excessive amounts of taxation and the super high cost of living there. But it's the impact of allowing environmentalists to dictate your policy there that has brought you to that place where your resources are now damaged and you have these kinds of problems.
I don't see a correlation with the environmentalists and a democracy in a foreign state.
Well, you were talking about California. California is not a foreign state. You are one of the United States. And the amount of money that you have from the federal government is not being lowered because we're spending money in Iraq. The money in Iraq comes from the defense budget. The money that you guys have to spend in your state comes from obviously your local and state taxes and then federal dollars that are allocated for infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And you guys have mismanaged your funds. So thank you so much for calling. That's the first hour. We've got hour 2 for you and so much more content. We have our second guest, Curtis Houck from Newsbusters, and we're going to talk about the rescission bill process. What's that even mean? And what does it have to do with the omnibus bill that I hate so much? I'm going to tell you that when we get back. So stay here for important news and information from One News Now. Subscribe at StacyOnTheRight.com, and we'll be back with you in a few moments.
Always stay up to date with the latest in the culture war from the news team of One News Now. Use the One News Now mobile app. It neatly categorizes news and articles from the One News Now website in an easy-to-find format. You can read the stories, watch videos, and conveniently share any news story. It's now available for download from your phone's app store.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
This is American Family News. I'm Steve Jordahl. President Trump is pulling the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear agreement. Here's Fox's John Decker from Washington.
Saying the Iran deal is defective at its core, President Trump said the U.S. will withdraw from the agreement and reimpose tough sanctions on Iran.
The deal does nothing to constrain Iran's destabilizing activities, including its support for terrorism.
The president has frequently denounced the 2015 agreement as disastrous, saying it gives Iran too much room to cheat on nuclear weapons development. The president said he wanted to give America's allies a chance to improve the deal, in which Iran agreed to limit its nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
And the president says a date and location has been picked for his high-stakes meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
At this very moment, Secretary Pompeo is on his way to North Korea in preparation for my upcoming meeting with Kim Jong-un.
Details of the meeting have not been made public. This is the second time the Secretary of State Pompeo has met with the North Korean leader just in the last couple of weeks. School officials are investigating a possible hate crime after 2 Townsend University Jewish students were assaulted walking to a house early in the morning last week. AFN's Bob Kellogg has details.
2 Jewish students report they were being followed by 2 other unidentified students who started yelling ethnic slurs. One of the victims was punched in the face and the other called 911. Tammy Rossman Benjamin of OMCA says such physical attacks on Jewish students are rare.
So it is extreme. Does it concern me in terms of a pattern? I would say at this point not, because it's one incident and we do not see many incidents. We haven't seen this year. I have seen similar things in previous years, but they're rare.
Though violence has not increased, Rossman Benjamin says the hostility toward Jews and Israel on campuses is sharply increasing.
We are seeing a real trend that's increasing dramatically from last year to this year, for sure, of animus towards Israel, directed towards Israel and Israelis and Zionists in general.
The two perpetrators, who appeared to be intoxicated, were not arrested. It will be up to the victims to file charges if they so choose, according to the CBS affiliate in Baltimore. I'm Bob Kellogg.
Authorities believe up to a half a dozen bodies of missing girls could be buried in a wooded area north of Detroit. Warren Police Commissioner Bill Dwyer tells WJBK-TV that officers are excavating Tuesday at a site in Macomb Township for the remains of 12-year-old Kimberly King, who was last seen in 1979. Dwyer says there's maybe 4 to 6 other girls that have been reported missing and that may be buried there, and that police are certainly convinced that they have the right area. The effect of the Me Too movement is being felt in the courts. An embattled California judge, Aaron Persky, is facing a recall vote next month after imposing a light sentence on a convicted sex offender. Stanford University athlete Brock Turner sexually assaulted a drunk, unconscious woman on campus in 2015. Judge Persky gave Turner 6 months in jail and 3 years probation, prompting critics to denounce the punishment as too lenient and biased. The judge disputing claims of bias based on a review of his record.
3 independent organizations have examined the claims of bias. The Commission on Judicial Performance, the Associated Press examined my rulings in jury trials in Palo Alto, and the Santa Clara County Bar Association. 3 organizations have rejected those claims.
Judge Persky says the sentence was justified, noting a harsher punishment would have had a severe impact on Turner. And Hawaii Governor David Ige says he has called the White House and the Federal Emergency Management Authority to tell officials that he believes the state would need federal help to deal with the erupting volcano that has spewed lava from fissures and prompted evacuations. Ige made the comments Monday when he met with the people on Hawaii's Big Island who have left their homes near the Kilauea volcano. For American Family News, I'm Steve Jordahl.
Is God calling you to pursue theological graduate education? What's keeping you from taking the first step? Is it time? What if you could choose from flexible class options? Is it money? What if competitively priced seminary offered academic scholarships? Do you think you're alone? What if your classmates were just like you, balancing careers and families with seminary? Hello, I'm Dr. John Nyhoff, president of Wesley Biblical Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. Take the first step. Visit wbs.edu.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Well, you first have to understand, what does the rescission bill allow you to do? We've watched most of this frustration with Congress happens in the Senate, and not with the Republicans in the Senate, but the Democrats, because it takes 60 votes to do anything. When we look to repeal this burdensome regulatory world, remember, you have a Congressional Review Act that allows you to pass it in the House and Senate with a simple majority. Well, we did that 16 times. Nobody else has ever to do that except one time. Rescissions was actually a common practice from President Ford to Clinton. Ronald Reagan did it 214 times. Bill Clinton did it 111 times. And what it allows you to do is look at spending, make a cut, pass it with a majority in the House and 51 votes in the Senate. I believe this shouldn't be a partisan idea. It wasn't in the past. So let's go find places that we could have savings. There are accounts that are funded that those programs no longer exist or can't be used. So why would the money stay there? Repeal it and bring it back. And so we've worked with the president. This is something he's trying to make sure. Let's cut wasteful spending. I think that should be a bipartisan plan. But watching Nancy, everything is partisan.
And it's not working out well. I know a lot of what the Democrats are doing right now is, hey, resist. We need to resist. And people seem to be responding to that. But exactly what is the end goal there? obviously it's get rid of President Trump. Okay, well, I don't see that happening. Now, maybe something comes out and, I've been saying that all along. There's a possibility that they'll be able to somehow cobble something together, but it's clear they don't have anything on the collusion, and the obstruction of justice count is also, it's the likelihood of that being true is dwindling as well. So what are we going to see? What exactly is going to be the outcome of this except the wasting of millions, multiple tens of millions of taxpayer dollars on a witch hunt? So you've got Representative McCarthy talking about the rescission bill process, and Maria Bartiromo calls him on the carpet because he's saying that the rescission bill is the way to kind of fix their really messed up omnibus bill, that they can kind of get some credibility back by using the rescission process. And it sounds pretty simple. It sounds like something that they could actually pull off. If you only need a simple majority in the House where the Republicans rule and, a simple majority in the Senate, you don't need anything filibuster proof or anything like that, then why not go for it? You've got nothing to lose. Well, she calls him out on some of the things some promises that they made on the campaign trail, not just President Trump, but all of them were saying the same things. It was like a broken record. We're going to defund Planned Parenthood. We're going to, seal the border. We're going to build a wall. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. So what have they gotten done? It's number two.
It wasn't bipartisan when you actually had the chance to say no to this and no to Planned Parenthood and no to something else, health care. You signed the bill. So where are the areas to actually cut? Can you identify some areas that you could?
This is how the program works. OMB puts it together, sends it to the House, and we have 45 days to act, and it takes 51. So they are looking at accounts that have been sitting there, that have been funded, that programs are no longer existing, but the money's sitting there. Why wouldn't you cut that wasteful spending? If there is a place that we could save the taxpayer money, we should look at that, and especially bipartisan. But look, I asked Steny Hoyer the other day in a colloquy. He said he would look at something like that because they have a history of voting for it, but now they're denying everything, just like they're trying to deny the president these appointments. There's 1,200 positions that have to be confirmed. If you take the last 6 presidencies, in the first 2 years, there was only 24 cloture votes. Today, there's 88.
Wow.
They are trying to dismantle government in the process. They're trying to make the president not successful. But you know what? We are winning in the process, and we will keep making sure we're fighting. I don't care if they fight the opioids. We will get this done.
Okay, so he talked a lot about opioids. He mentioned that a couple of times, how the Democrats have voted against programming that would help with the opioid crisis in America. But I want you to hear, there's tons of unauthorized government programs that continue to be funded. Now, some of them we really need, like the FBI. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, none of those agencies have actually been reauthorized by Congress since 2009. The State Department hasn't been reauthorized since 2003. The Federal Trade Commission, National Weather Services, that's 1998 and 1993, respectively. The Federal Election Commission has been operating with an expired authorization since 1981. Now, these are the agencies that operate without authorization. This is not the list, which I've given to you before here on the show, of programs that are still funded, even though they've expired. Yeah. So let's go to the phones. We have Hank in California. Thanks for calling the show today.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Hi. I had a question about the last caller. He was saying something about democracy in Iraq or something.
Yeah.
Wasn't it the Republicans that started that?
Started what?
And it was the Democrats that walked their way through the Middle East. Like Libya.
I'm not sure what you're getting at. Are you saying that Republicans went over to the Middle East and started a war? Or are you saying that the Republicans funded our first foray into the Middle East?
I'm saying that the Republicans started it, and then they handed it off to Obama, and then the Democrats finished it. And then
How
the
so?
Republicans took over, and now
How have the Democrats finished it? So when Barack Obama left office, the Middle East was experiencing peace.
Yeah.
There was peace in the Middle East when Barack
the
Obama
drug
left.
campaign in the Middle 'East. 'East. Yeah, Barack Obama. 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 Yeah, Barack Obama.
Thanks for calling the show. Oh my goodness. We have some interesting callers today. Not sure if they're all sober. Not sure what's going on there, but anyway. So you've got this rescission bill process that McCarthy is describing. And I just don't understand why. So how can you're making $173,000 a year, most of the Congress people, or more if they're in leadership. And we don't even talk about all of the untold perks and benefits that they receive through, insider trading and investment and business opportunities that they can indulge in because of their positions of power. And all they have to do is make sure that authorizations have been signed. Most of these people have staffs of 20, 25. Some of them have an office with 30 people working in it. And you're telling me they couldn't get together and form a little informal working group and say, I'm sending 5 of my staffers to you. Everybody contribute 2 staffers or 5 staffers. Every single program that runs from the government, starting at the top all the way to the bottom, we're going to dedicate, let's not say 5. Let's say we're going to dedicate 2 staffers to checking every single program, every single agency, checking its last reauthorization and whether or not it isn't currently in compliance. You're telling me that can't get done? It can't be that Stacey Washington sitting out here in the hinterlands of the country in the Midwest, the untouchable hinterlands, that I could come up with just in the last couple of seconds a way to make sure that these kinds of embarrassing news stories don't come out. This story on Politico about agencies that have not been reauthorized, it goes into detail. Every single federal agency is supposed to operate under congressional authorization, which is a set of rules that define priorities and activities in the government. So we've got multi-billion-dollar, according to this article, zombie government programs. Congress lets the bills languish in which the reauthorizations are to be taken care of. In the 2016 fiscal year, Congress funded more than $300 billion in programs that lawmakers have not reauthorized. More than a quarter of discretionary spending. That's a huge jump from 10 decades ago. It's a huge jump from 2 decades ago when unauthorized programs were closer to $35 billion, just 10% of the budget. Oh, so annoying, right? So annoying. So implicit in the budget process is a middle step. Congress granting the authority for money to be spent. Historically, these so-called authorizations were permanent, and for many years in the 19th century, they weren't even put in writing. They were simply assumed. It wasn't until after World War II that Congress began putting an expiration date on their authorizations, ensuring that lawmakers would regularly reevaluate programs and agencies. The point there was that those agencies would be reevaluated and they would be reauthorized, and that would keep people on their toes and they wouldn't feel like they had forever jobs, and that they hoped that would make the government run more efficiently and there'd be less waste. I do not understand how this is possible that that's not going on right now. How is that not happening? What are they doing? So, call lines are open 866-963-2037. I want to get back to the JCPOA. Leader McConnell has issued a statement as well. He says, I share the objective and commitment made by the president that Iran should never be able to acquire or develop a nuclear weapon. And he goes on to say, I won't read the whole thing, but the closing statement he makes is, our European partners now have an opportunity to come back to the table with Secretary Pompeo and negotiate the best terms to create either a better agreement or a maximum pressure campaign against Iran. I share the objective and commitment made by the president that Iran should never be able to acquire or develop a nuclear weapon. So, again, one of the most important things we can do at this point is to understand the reasoning behind the ending of the deal. And since the deal has now been undone, what the way forward is. I'm excited because this is yet another thing that the president can cross off of his list. He said he was going to do this, and he did it. So speaking of the rescission bills, we actually, and maybe we'll get Mark Meckler on to discuss this budget rescission. He's, I guess, against it. He's saying that President Trump used the executive power under the authority of the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974 to cut $15 billion from the $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill passed in March. Now, this might not seem like a big accomplishment. He cut only a little more than 0.1% of a massive spending bill, mainly because it's not. And it's mainly a acknowledgement that a lot of people on the conservative side are upset about exploding deficits, et cetera, et cetera. Cutting $15 billion is a good start, but we need to be looking for many, many more cuts, and they need to be much deeper than 15 billion. Like that's nothing compared to the entire omnibus spending bill. So hopefully we're going to see more rescission bills, and we'll have more of an opportunity to kind of look at that. So I've been kind of hesitant to go any further, obviously, but explosions have been heard near Damascus, and there have been unusual movements of Iranian forces. Wow. And of course, President Obama has come out and said that withdrawing from the deal was a serious mistake. Yeah, we kind of expected him to say that, did we not? Now, I want to pivot over to, before I go on to that, I want to pivot over to some comments that were made. And we're going to actually listen to that audio later on in the show, because I want to preview that for you. Apparently, Melania Trump isn't culturally American, according to April D. Ryan, who is one of the White House correspondents, and she's always jousting with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. So we're going to listen to the audio of that, and we're going to talk about why liberals are allowed to say who's culturally American, but we're not allowed to say that people who come here and refuse to speak the language aren't being American. Liberals won't allow you to say that, but she's allowed to say that Melania Trump is not culturally American. It's a really nasty insult to say that to the First Lady of the United States just because she happens to be an immigrant. And she's not the first First Lady to be an immigrant. She's the second. So I don't see why this is such a big deal. Like, she's not even breaking any ground there. So Syria says Israel struck near Damascus as IDF opened shelters bracing for an Iranian attack. This is on Haaretz.com. Syrian air defenses downed 2 Israeli missiles, and Syrian state TV reports Israel believes Iran is planning an imminent attack, and they opened public shelters in the north. This is as the president pulls out of the disastrous Iran nuclear deal, imposing powerful sanctions. And Israel says they will eliminate Assad if he continues to let Iran operate from Syria. Iran is seeking revenge on Israel without claiming responsibility, taking a page from Israel's playbook, according to Haaretz.com. All right, when we get back, we're going to have our guest. It's Curtis Houck, managing editor for Newsbusters. He'll be with us right after this.
Isn't that a beautiful sound? The Sonogram holds the sound of a baby's heartbeat. Hi, I'm Will Addison, Director of Urban Family Talk. We are partnering with the Ministry of Preborn to help save babies' lives. Preborn partners with pregnancy centers throughout America in helping abortion-minded women choose life through ultrasound. By letting a mother hear her baby's heartbeat and see her baby in her womb, she will choose life 80% of the time. Ultrasound is a game changer. For $140, you can provide 5 ultrasounds. All gifts are tax deductible, and 100% of your gift goes to saving babies. You can save a baby's life right here in America by donating to Preborn. To donate, dial pound 250 and say keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Or donate securely at preborn.com. Your love can save a life.
Up next, Carol Swain with 2 minutes to think about it. From poverty to professor, from GED to PhD, a bold Christian speaking truth to power. Here's Carol with today's 2 minutes.
Hello, folks. You often hear people bemoan the fact that Washington seems to be full of people who are overpaid and underexperienced. Every once in a while, someone with a resume full of relevant experience seems to sneak through the doorway, and if we're lucky, even end up in a cabinet-level position. One of those very people has become President Trump's next Secretary of State, having survived the hyper-partisan halls of Congress. Mike Pompeo went through this process when he took his position last year as director of the CIA. It's interesting to note that during those hearings, 14 Senate Democrats, including Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein, voted in favor of him. Pompeo's year at the CIA has been without scandal. He secretly laid the groundwork for the president's upcoming talks with North Korea, and he's had more experience than the outgoing Rex Tillerson. It's seen to be a matter of partisan politics rather than qualification, a way of getting at the president. Remember, Republicans supported both John Kerry and Hillary Clinton for the same posts. Presidential Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders put it best. Look, at some point, Democrats have to decide whether they love this country more than they hate this president. As future candidates come to the grill on the Hill, we'll see if she's right.
To learn more about Carol and the Carol Swain Foundation, visit carolmswain.net and make sure you follow her on Facebook at Professor Carol M. Swain and on Twitter at Carol M. Swain.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you for being with us and for sharing the show. If you're on Periscope or YouTube or any one of our channels on Facebook, please share the program so other people can see what you're enjoying and hopefully enjoy it as well. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome Curtis Houck. He's the managing editor for Newsbusters and frequent guest on the program. Curtis, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, no problem, Stacey.
Hey, let's talk about this. So the Rosie O'Donnell donations, apparently there's been a lot of comparison between these and what happened with Dinesh D'Souza. And apparently it's not exactly the same. She's given over the legal limit to numerous different campaigns and different groups. And she's done so under varying names, apparently to try and skirt the limits. But she did not give through someone else. In other words, give money to someone else to give on her behalf. So is she still in the wrong or what?
All right, so let's walk through some of this here just to lay everything out there. Yes, as you kind of pointed out that she gave a combined $5,400 in contributions over the limit of 5 candidates using 5 different addresses and 4 different variations of her name. First of all, that alone, in terms of intent, is I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I never wanted to be and never do, but I feel like in terms of proving intent, that is pretty, one does not simply just spell your name differently 4 different times or use 5 different addresses to make, donations over the $2,700 legal limit per election here, okay? And she should know better because you look at it, my colleague Tim Graham looked at it and found that, she's donated over $90,000 to 50 different, federal and candidates and committees in this 2018 election cycle. And probably even further going back, through the decade or the last couple of decades. So she knows, or at least her people know, how donating to political candidates works here. So she's not new to this game. So I think that's another thing that shows how nefarious this is and that she's doing it for candidates across the country, ranging from $2,950 to everyone's favorite, Adam Schiff, to $4,700 for Doug Jones. I mean, I think if you're trying to prove a case here that she's pretty guilty of this, and as we, point out in this age of Trump and Hillary Clinton and whatever, all these other things, people go to jail for far less. Just look back to Martha Stewart, basically lying to the FBI, speaking of Jim Comey. So this here is something that really stinks. But again, if liberals didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have standards.
I mean, they wouldn't have any. Like, they'd have negative standards if they didn't have double standards.
Yeah, negative standards.
They'd have
yes.
Is there such a thing as having fewer than one standard? So -1 or negative below. Like, there's no way to describe how little standards they'd have. So
exactly.
And they don't obviously they'll never see a problem with it because Rosie O'Donnell is another sacred cow for them. And I'm not saying that as an insult. I'm saying she's a sacred cow. She's someone that is untouchable. She's above the law. She's above reproach. And for us, we don't have anybody like that because as Republicans, we're all supposed to be not just only imminently prosecutable, but guilty, always guilty, like the way they're treating President Trump.
We have the most sinister intents too. Whenever someone on the left does something wrong or that could be thought of as possibly having broken the law, they never meant to. We saw that with Hillary Clinton. They never meant to set up an email server, and they never meant to pass along emails. Hillary Clinton never meant to send classified emails from a public server or have it in a water closet at in her place at Chappaqua or So again, but on the right, whether it's Dinesh D'Souza or what's going on in the Russia investigation, it's always nefarious motives. And, and that's how the law works. It is, when you're trying to prove a murder case, you have to prove, a lot of the time, you have to prove intent that someone would want to do something. That's just how this law works. So the left has corrupted it and made it work to their favor. And that's something that, in terms of turning the boat around, we have to do. And especially that's why it's great with this president and his judicial nominations. Again, as a media guy, that's not talked about a lot. But actually, I'm kind of okay with that one.
Okay, so let's talk about penalties. I've seen something earlier today. They were like, "Oh, she'll just get fined for doing that." Why? Why did Martha Stewart have to take her beautiful $900 bag to jail while Rosie O'Donnell has done quite a bit? I mean, it's apparent that something has gone wrong, and she won't have to go to jail at all. I'm not a fan of Martha Stewart going to jail. I don't think Rosie O'Donnell should have to go to jail. But why the inequality here? Does not the law have a stronger punishment for doing this? Because according to liberals, campaign finance is the one area where Republicans are beating them, and we're evil, and we're lording our companies as human beings over them. All that jazz. But here we have Rosie O'Donnell, she's richer than everybody, and she's just like, who cares? She's giving all the money she wants.
Right, and I think what makes her even more untouchable is the fact that she was attacked a decade ago by then private citizen Trump. Those were far simpler times back then when that was going on. But since then, she had a disastrous turn on The View, and now again, 2,700. The left is so much for campaign finance, supposed campaign finance reform, where you basically can't. You can't really give any substantial amount of money to anyone. We do have that in place in terms of direct money to the candidates, $2,700 legal limit. And that's not even this dark money, nefarious super PAC thing going on. Rosie should know better that it's pretty blatant here, but the left wants to have it both ways. They want to say that decry the campaign finance laws and dark money and other things, but then they want to skirt the rules and engage in the same amount of politics. You see people like Eric Holder working on super PACs for redistricting and teaming up with the DNC. You're just seeing more of this, but their only argument is we have to play the rights game to be able to win it. Again, you're trying to have it both ways here, and it just doesn't work.
So is it not so that she's one of the ones that has said quite a bit about Citizens United? Like, I'm trying to remember, there are a few stars who've just been crazy about Citizens United. I thought she was one of them.
It would make, I was going to say, I can't recall, but specifically, she's someone who definitely would be in favor of that. She's, she thinks she knows. She's like Michael Moore. She thinks she knows everything, but she actually doesn't. And she's running around calling Trump, an orange, nightmare. And, and she's at the point where she's saying that she said last year in November she spent 90% of her hours tweeting hatred at Trump. And it's taken her a year to adjust to life under Donald Trump. So, again, this is someone who just thinks she knows everything, but she really doesn't. She doesn't know anything. And there's few things more amusing than celebrities who pretend to know everything, whether it comes to campaign finance reform or Russian collusion or campaign finance laws, when they don't know what they're talking about. And I just, it's hard to, not laugh at that, or Rosie O'Donnell try to think she knows that Brian Williams, going back to the Brian Williams scandal, that he was not lying to the American people when he talked, various stories over his career. So again, this is just a pattern of behavior. But again, this is an example where, you can't, law doesn't care, whether you're smart or dumb. It shouldn't. So she should be, facing some trouble right now, but no one wants to talk about it because one of the people that talked about it was the New York Post. And the New York Post is just a tabloid. Nobody, they can't possibly be true. So here we are, not talking about that, and we're talking about things like Don Blankenship in West Virginia because that's what the news media want to talk about. That's how they want to frame the debate.
What's funny about that is I'm sure if we took the time to go through her Twitter archive, we could find all kinds of tweets about almost anything that has to do with politics, any major story of the day, and we could find that, maybe she has a incorrect rate of, I don't know, whatever percentage it might be, and she'll never be held accountable for it. Meanwhile, President Trump says, he's the new sheriff in town, and everyone's like, that's a political edict. He's saying that he's an actual sheriff and he's never been to sheriff school. He's never been certified as a sheriff. And they're like, it's just a saying. He's making a declaration about his ability to adjudicate the law or to prosecute offenders. This is the kind of nonsensical, the reactions are, you're right, it's almost comical, but it's also, to me, a little almost like it's scary kind of, because everyone expected us to have all this amazing context with President Obama. But with President Trump, you just read Rosie O'Donnell's tweets. You can tell she takes every single thing he tweets literally. Anything he says, literally. Even if he's clearly joking or bragging or doing, in other words, trying to have some fun, it's literal. So here she is literally breaking the law, and we're supposed to just overlook it because she's Rosie O'Donnell.
Right, and I'll also bring back the fact that she was made a host of The View, and she still is held in high regard going on late-night talk shows, despite the fact that she's a 9/11 truther. Forgot to mention that she's a 9/11 truther.
No, Curtis, no. She can't be a 9/11 truther.
Basically saying that to Nicole Wallace at one point in 2014, when did you want to pop Sarah Palin? So when it comes to Rosie O'Donnell, nothing is off limits, including breaking the law.
I'm stuck at 9/11 truther. I'm sorry. That's beyond the pale.
Yeah. There's people like Van Jones that are on television, or Toure that, they're on television despite being 9/11 truthers. And that just, more than anything else, they could be a communist, it could be anything else. But I feel like 9/11 truther is something where we should, all as Americans, agree to draw the line in terms of civility, in terms of, baseline IQ and intellectual know-how to be on television, but I guess not.
Yes, all the things you listed, but mainly because 3,000 some odd Americans that day. I mean, we're talking about a major loss of life for us, the downing of our economy, and a complete cultural shift. It's a moment of devastation that I'll never forget it. Like I can't tolerate 9/11 truthers.
I take, personal offense to that.
Oh my goodness.
It's crazy. But again, this is allowed, and the people overlook this in the news media, and they never pressure these people who hold these views, but they still treat them as this kind of, political, smarty pants when, that's just disqualifying.
It is. I had no idea. I actually, in my life, I do know of two people who are 9/11 truthers, and one of them is a genuinely wonderful person. But whenever the subject comes up, I just walk away. I will not tolerate that kind of talk. And the reason is because it's a waste of my time. We all know that 9/11 trutherism is just the worst kind of, it's probably some kind of mental illness, really, honestly. And
it's like Iranians denying the Holocaust.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
It is in that same level of crazy pants. It's, Moronville, Bullet Train, you're there. It's just crazy. Okay, so do you see her at all getting in even a little fine, anything? Do you think they're going to do anything about this?
Well, I could definitely see, possibly a fine or something like that. Now that it's out there, albeit, even if the left wants to deny the veracity of it because of it coming from the New York Post, you could see a fine. But for people as wealthy as Rosie O'Donnell, it doesn't really send a message. I don't think it sends a message, and it doesn't send a message to other people that may be thinking about doing something like this. And that's where it's difficult with wealthy people in particular in terms of hurting them in their pocketbook. Really what really sends a message is jail time or probation or something like that. And we've seen that happen with people like Martha Stewart and with Dinesh D'Souza, that it was really difficult. And it was something that, by and large, by most accounts, should not have happened.
I know. I understand the rules that were broken, but I think a year-long sentence for Dinesh, there are people who raped people who've not done a year's worth of jail time. So I just thought it was excessive in his case. And then in the case of Martha Stewart, I hated seeing it. And I noticed that the majority of the reaction to her conviction was that people were taking glee in the fact that she was rich and she'd have to go to jail. And what else did she do but write a whole bunch of books about how to have a pretty house and a bunch of books about recipes? Yeah. She was, out of all the Hollywood people and TV types, she was the least offensive to me. I actually enjoyed her TV stuff about decorating. It was
Most
inoffensive.
People do, and that whole thing. That's why she was popular. She had a line at Kmart. She didn't have a line at, some designer place, So it is what it is. And that's why I think a lot of conservatives, lastly with, criminal justice reform, they realize about white-collar crimes like this and how people who commit violent crimes get way less time. And what kind of balance do we create with that? And what message does that send? So not only do we have an application problem of the law, we just do an application of the law, but also kind of a mentality and in terms of a messaging problem in terms of how we deal with certain crimes.
And Curtis, that guy, David Brock, who raped the young woman while she was unconscious, he got 6 months. Martha Stewart went to jail for a year. And so did Dinesh D'Souza. Mm-hmm. It makes you wonder if you're in the Twilight Zone.
It happens, yeah. It's it is really confusing sometimes, and trying to explain to people who may not be following the news how something could happen like this, or that Rosie could get off, scot-free or something like that. It is difficult, and I hate not having, as kind of a political commentator person, I hate not having an answer, but I just don't sometimes with things like that.
Well, Curtis, you can't be blamed for not having an answer for this one, because honestly, it's pretty clear that there's a double standard there and it should not exist. The problem is we're not in charge of anything. I'm just doing radio. Mm-hmm. You're doing commentating and running Newsbusters. We don't have enough power. We need more power.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining the show today. I'm glad that at least now we have broken it down. We've offered some good comparisons. If you're at the water cooler working or something tomorrow and somebody brings up the fact that it's not that big of a deal, you can bring up some of the examples that Curtis gave. Fantastic. Thank you, Curtis Houck, managing editor for Newsbusters. Talk to you again soon.
No problem, Stacey. Thanks.
All right. So we'll be back with our last segment of the show, where we're going to talk about April Ryan's horrible comments against the First Lady of the United States. And before you get your underwear all bunched up, I used to defend Michelle Obama. Remember that? How people used to get mad at me for defending Michelle Obama? I defended her because she was the First Lady of the United States. Not for policies, but because she was not the actual candidate. Same thing for Melania. I'm equal opportunity. And we'll talk about the rumor that Melania doesn't live at the White House. So stay there. And I'll take your calls. Be right back.
This is Uncommon Moments with Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy and his wife Lauren on their uncommon marriage adventure. Available now in paperback.
In James 5:16, James wrote, "The earnest prayer of a righteous person has great power and produces wonderful results." So imagine the power of a couple who pray together. Again, it will take intentionality to make time to be still and to pray with each other. Now, Tony makes sure that we do that in our household. Every night before we go to bed, he reaches over to the nightstand and he sets his alarm clock. So every morning when that alarm goes off and the bedroom light goes on, we get up together and we spend glorious time with our Heavenly Father.
The Uncommon Marriage Adventure by Tony and Lauren Dungy. Now available in softcover from Tyndale Momentum. More info at CoachDungy.com.
Abraham Hamilton III.
God put us in this world at this time to be salt and light. We don't fold because of the darkness that we're facing. This is not the first time in the world's history that it's gotten dark. God has called you and I to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment.
Tune in to the Hamilton Corner, weekdays at 5 p.m. Central on Urban Family Talk.
I don't know about your past. If you will connect with the kingdom of God, God can turn that thing around.
Dr. Tony Evans says our history doesn't have to cost us our hope.
He can take your yesterdays and make them better tomorrows. It's not too late.
A look at how the Lord does his perfect work through imperfect people. This week on The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've been all over the country helping disaster victims who lose everything.
It's truly a blessing. I really don't have the words to express.
And yet they see a glimmer of hope when a volunteer shows up.
Building the home, that's the second reason we're here. The number one reason is to share the gospel and give them hope.
It's everything that's right in America. I mean, it really represents the best that we have to offer.
That's one of the main reasons for doing it, is being able to be the hands and feet of Jesus and coming out and working with so many wonderful volunteers.
I just feel like it's important in this day and age to teach a child how to serve.
Please go to our website, 8daysofhope.com, and click on Get Involved. Submit your email address, and the next time we go anywhere with a disaster, we'll invite you to come along as well.
I love coming in the job room because you can see these pieces of paper. They aren't just a piece of paper. Right. It's a family that's hurting, and it's a gospel opportunity.
You know, I just thank God, for this moment. I mean, I'll be back in my home, and I know it's going to be awesome.
Come love others with 8 Days of Hope.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
April Kate points out there is, obviously some pretty painful reality in the First Lady taking on cyberbullying and being kind online. And the First Lady is well aware of that.
Yeah, she's well aware of her husband's cyberbullying. He's considered by some, well, many, I would say, in different sectors, one of the biggest bullies. He will call you out in a moment's notice. And she stood in front of him and basically said she wants to show young people how it's done and do it right, and they will pick up those habits. I wonder if the president will change. But there are realities. There are a lot of realities that she's dealing with. This is a First Lady who is not culturally American, but she is learning the ways. And this is not just an American issue. These are not just American issues. These are international issues. Cyberbullying is an international issue. Social media is international. And also the opioid addiction issue. So it's not just here, but it's abroad as well. And we'll see if she takes that message abroad as she rolls this out for the next 4 years.
So welcome back to the show, everybody. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037. I am sitting here a little shocked that April D. Ryan, who happens to be, of the same persuasion with the permanent tan, would say that someone isn't culturally American. Do you remember some of the allegations that Barack Obama didn't have a sufficient American cultural grounding because he spent a huge chunk of his childhood growing up in Indonesia under another name and then moved to the United States, but instead of, living in the contiguous United States, he grew up in Hawaii and with his grandparents who had a bit of money, so there was some affluence there, and he was attending private schools, and so his childhood was not the same as your average everyday black middle class kid. My husband and I used to joke around about how Barack Obama was never pinched in church, and if you are a church going kid, you don't have to be black to have experienced that, where you're sitting there and, as kids, so kids forget their surroundings. That's one of the best things about being a kid, honestly. And you forget your surroundings, and now you're kicking the pew in front of you. You're humming. You're maybe clapping your hands a little bit. You're in your own world. You're imagining that you're flying through space. Whatever your thing was when you were a kid, you're doing that. And then all of a sudden, you feel what could only be a laser boring into you. And you turn and look, and it's your mom. And my mom could just look. She would just look over. And it wasn't overtly frightening, obviously, because she still looked pretty. She would just look over. And whatever I was doing, foot in mid-swing, hands tapping or clicking or smacking or whatever I was doing, I would freeze. And I think, oh no, I hope she doesn't pinch me. And so, when you're pinched in church, you're not allowed to scream out. It's not like you get pinched and you're like, ow, you can't do anything. You just have to sit there and just take it because you're getting told in church that you need to be quiet. And so this is old school, admittedly. Some of you youngins who listen to the show, you're thinking, that sounds like child abuse. It's not child abuse. It's just what used to happen. My mom was from the South, both my parents. And you could not cut up in church. There was no screaming or loud talking. You needed to whisper. And there was no big, huge children's ministry with televisions and green slime and all this fun stuff to do. No, there was no children's ministry pastor. There was just church, and you were in it for the whole time with your parents. And you had to learn how to sit there quietly and stand up and sing when everyone else did and bow your head and pray when everyone else did. And when there was preaching going on, if you weren't going to listen to it, then you had to sit there and you had to maintain radio silence. And so my husband and I used to joke about this all the time, that Barack Obama didn't know anything about that because he didn't have a black mom. No offense. I mean, his family is what his family is. He also didn't have a black dad in the picture. So there's certain things that happen in black families, they're just kind of little peculiarities. They don't make us odd or weird. It's not abuse. It's none of that stuff, but it's just things that are culturally normative in black families, or were normative when I was a kid in black families, that just don't count anymore. They don't count for him because Barack Obama never experienced those things. And we know this because we can read in his books what he thought about his white grandparents, what he thought about his mom, with all of it. We know how he grew up. So that being said, people would say he doesn't talk like he loves America. He doesn't sound like, he thinks America is great. He keeps saying things. He doesn't sound like he loves American culture. And anytime someone would say that, oh, you racist, I can't believe you'd say that. Now you have April Ryan, who's black, saying this about Melania Trump, that she's not culturally American. Now, she's already been called out. I mean, it's just been brutal online. People are going in on her. But why did she feel like she had the ability to say that? Why did she feel like it was okay for her to express that view about Melania Trump? Why the hate? Why does she hate her so much? So then you've got Sarah Huckabee Sanders at the press briefing yesterday, and some reporter had the audacity to ask whether or not Melania Trump actually lives in the White House. It's number 4.
In its front page story this morning, the Washington Post, among many things, reported that there are persistent rumors that Mrs. Trump does not live in this White House and that she lives with her parents somewhere in the suburbs. What do you make of those rumors?
I make of the fact that just when you think the Washington Post can't get things any more wrong, they do, and that is an outrageous and ridiculous claim. The First Lady lives here at the White House. We see her regularly, and I think that's something that belongs in tabloid gossip, not on the front pages of the Washington Post, and I hope that they'll do better next time.
Now, listen, I want to tell y'all, I've only been there 2 times this year. Well, 2 times in the White House and once at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. So I didn't see Melania the second time I was at the White House, but I saw her the first time I was there or actually it was reversed. It's the second time that I was in the actual White House this year. I saw Melania Trump there, and she knew all of the staffers and the ushers and pages, and she didn't seem like someone who was just jetting in there from the suburbs. Now, I think this is one of those situations where we're going to have to just kind of, the same way we ignore some things that we know we can't change, we're going to have to start putting our little ignoring caps on when it comes to their comments about the First Lady. And the reason I say that is because they simultaneously say that she's unattractive and looks awkward while commenting on her beauty and how Donald Trump surrounds himself with women who are of a certain type, his daughter, his wife, the wives of the sons, all of the women they say look the same. So, you, in some ways, when you play the hater, it comes out as a compliment, because if you're going to keep talking about her looks and she wears high heels too often and she wears, fancy clothes too often and all this other stuff, it kind of belies the fact that, she looks good and you kind of hate it. So I actually appreciated what I saw when I was there. When I saw she and the president together, they looked very snappy. She was gorgeous. And this is in person. You know how hard it is to pull things off in person. Often on television or in print, someone can appear a certain way, but when you see them in person, it's not the same. It was the same. She was gorgeous, and really, she was well put together, and then she presented herself very well in the gathering where I saw them both. So, I just wish that if we were going to say that Michelle Obama was off limits, then why not allow the Trump family members to be off limits as well? Not Jared Kushner, since he works at the White House. Maybe not Ivanka Trump. But if you're going to talk about Ivanka, why the looks? Why talking about her looks and her, things like that, the personal attacks? I still don't understand why adults who are Democrats engage in that. I know that there are some Republicans who engage in it as well. I don't approve of it on either side, but I think it's just, it's really interesting how this is cracking out, that now we've taken to, in addition to trying to make it seem like she's someone we should feel sorry for because she's married to the president, and this is a choice of hers. This is modern day America, where divorce is du jour. Anyone who wants to get a divorce, even the First Lady of the United States, even before she became First Lady, she could have just said, this is enough. I'm not doing this anymore. And it would not have prevented him from being elected. Not in this day and age. So to act as if she's some kind of hostage or prisoner, it just doesn't make sense. Why would a modern woman like Melania Trump, who has wealth and access, why would she stay there if she didn't want to? Don't say it's for the kid. I mean, you just don't see that anymore either. People don't even pretend they're staying together for their kids. So what would prevent her from leaving if that's what she wanted to do? Nothing. So I think it's just a distraction. It's irrelevant. But I just find it interesting that you've got both of these things going on at the same time. They come out with a hit piece on Melania Trump and their marriage about how they never spend any time together. How much time did Michelle Obama spend with her husband when he was constantly golfing, when he was constantly out of the country? She didn't travel with him. Sometimes they go on vacation and take separate planes. But the left never had anything to say. Now, every time we see Melania Trump, she's on the president's arm. They're together. And they don't spend any time together? What do they mean exactly? So, there's always going to be something. People are always going to have something to say. So I'm headed over to Twitter and the trending Twitter items. Obviously, the JCPOA is trending. And something about a Google duplex. I'm not even going there. So John Brennan has been out. John Kasich, oh man, John Kasich is out with a statement against the U.S. withdrawing from the Iran deal. Now, I'm sorry, but why do we care about John Kasich? He says President Trump's decision to withdraw from the JCPOA was a mistake. It has gotten us nothing other than to remove constraints on Iran's ability to produce nuclear weapons. Our allies, including the commander of the Israeli Defense Forces, believe that while this deal is not perfect, it is essential to constraining Tehran from such a move. Yada, 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 John Kasich. You know what I'm saying? Like, why do we care? We don't care. So I think I'll go back through a little bit and talk just a tad about the speaking engagement at WashU this morning. So first of all, most people, if they have a speaking engagement at a university of any kind, they promote it and they tweet about it. And, it riles up people who are from the university and they end up protesting. And so I decided not to promote the event and act, it wasn't an open forum anyway. I was speaking to a specific group at Washington University who invited me out to speak. The second thing is I knew there would be a heavy contingent of people who are liberals who would be at the speech today. I knew that because, it's Washington University and it's a big university, it's private, and it's very liberal. And so I knew there'd be conservatives there too, because the person who invited me to come and speak said he was familiar with my work and he liked it. So I was like, okay, so there are people there, from both sides. I didn't know what the mix would be. And honestly, I didn't even concern myself with it. When I got there and it was time for me to speak, I could feel intensely interested stares going on because I was sitting on a chair up near where the podium was, but not in front, like near the front corner, but not in front. So I'm sitting there waiting and as I glanced over, I'm like, there's like 2 or 3 people just staring at me. And I'm thinking, maybe they recognize me from something, because I do a lot of stuff around here locally. And so when I went up to start speaking and I told them what the subject matter was going to be, because they weren't prepped ahead of time on what I was going to discuss, and I started talking about the blueprint, and I gave them a brief history of how I came to be on the radio and doing public things like the things that I do. And I could see some of them, were kind of like, yeah, I know, you can see some people's faces. They're like, we know this. And there were some other people in the room who were kind of like, oh, Ladue Schools. Oh, you were on school board. That's how you got started. Okay, interesting. Radio show. Okay, interesting. And then I launched into the blueprint. And we have some pretty radical ideas in there. And I don't think they're radical, from the perspective of someone who's on the right. But if you're on the left, there's some pretty radical ideas in there. And they're being proposed by someone, obviously. I'm sporting the permanent tan, as Lonnie Poindexter likes to say. So I'm coming in there, and it's almost like unicorn time for them, because they're looking at me and they're seeing my mouth move and they're hearing things come out that should not come out of my mouth, because I be owned by them Democrats. Yeah, that's what's supposed to happen. Black, that means you have to be a Democrat. You're not even allowed to have a conservative thought. Ask Kanye West. So as I got further into it, I could see some of them shutting down. Like a couple of the women started sitting up straight and shaking their heads from side to side when I was talking about abortion. They crossed their legs, which is when you cross your legs and your arms in body language terms, that's closing yourself off. It got a little heated. Some of them yelled at each other. One guy yelled at me, but I stayed calm and I took it in stride. And I actually thought it went pretty well. Afterwards, I got a lot of people who said they didn't agree with me on everything, but they thought it was a great presentation and very thought-provoking. And I was happy to get a chance to do it. So I would do it again. If someone asked me to do it again, I would totally participate again. That's the show for today. Thank you so much for being with us. Hey, find me online at StaceyOnTheRight.com, and I'll be back with you tomorrow.